Number 1. Polaroid. Polaroid did not invent instant photography. Edwin Land did in 1948, and Polaroid was the company he built around that single transformative idea. For 3 decades, it operated at the absolute frontier of consumer imaging technology. The SX70, released in 1972, was a folding single-lens reflex instant camera that collapsed flat and produced a self-developing print in under a minute. Steve Jobs cited it as a design inspiration. That is the caliber of product Polaroid was making at its peak. Then digital imaging arrived, and instead of pivoting, Polaroid doubled down on instant film until the market had completely moved on. Bankruptcy came in 2001, again in 2008, and what reconstituted itself under the Polaroid name afterward is a licensing arrangement, not a camera company. The cameras are manufactured by third parties. The film is produced by a separate entity called Polaroid Originals, which started as a completely independent operation before acquiring the brand name, and the quality consistency across product lines is genuinely unpredictable depending on batch and storage conditions. The current Polaroid operates entirely on nostalgia capital, accumulated by a company that no longer exists in any meaningful engineering sense. The original Polaroid built miracles. The current version sells the memory of them. Number 2. Kodak. No brand on this list carries a heavier historical weight or a more instructive cautionary lesson. Kodak did not just participate in the photography industry. For most of the 20th century, Kodak essentially was the photography industry. At their peak in the late 1970s, Kodak controlled roughly 90% of film sales and 85% of camera sales in the United States. The Rochester, New York campus employed over 60,000 people. And then one of their own engineers, Steve Sasson, invented the first digital camera sensor in 1975. Kodak reviewed the prototype, recognized immediately that it would eventually destroy the film business, and buried it. That decision is now a required case study in business schools globally as one of the most consequential failures of corporate vision in modern industrial history. When digital photography became unavoidable, Kodak was already a decade behind competitors who had been developing the technology seriously. Bankruptcy came in 2012. What emerged is a restructured company focused primarily on commercial printing and packaging. The Kodak cameras sold today, the Ektra smartphone, various instant cameras, budget film point and shoots, are mostly licensed products manufactured elsewhere with the yellow and red logo applied for brand recognition value. The film, at least, is still real Kodak film, and it is genuinely excellent. The cameras attached to the name are a different conversation entirely. Number 3, Vivitar. Vivitar's series. One lenses, produced through the 1970s and into the early 1980s, were a legitimate achievement. Third-party optics were generally considered inferior during that era, and Vivitar upended the assumption by commissioning genuinely high-quality glass from Tokina, Komina, and other respected Japanese manufacturers under the Series 1 designation. The 90mm f2.5 macro was reviewed favorably against Nikon and Canon offerings at the time. That credibility was earned through actual optical engineering. The company that owned that credibility no longer exists. Vivitar was acquired, restructured, and eventually absorbed into Sakar International, which licenses the name across a broad catalog of budget electronics, including action cameras, digital point-and-shoots, and accessories. The modern Vivitar action camera is a repackaged module produced to a price point that makes the actual optical and electronic specifications nearly irrelevant. The customer support experience, if you ever need it, tends to involve a warranty card and optimism. The Series 1 lenses show up regularly on the second-hand market and are still worth buying. The cameras wearing the Vivitar badge today are not related to them in any practical sense. Number 4. Bell & Howell. Bell & Howell's credibility runs deep, and it is entirely genuine. Founded in 1907, the company supplied 16mm motion picture cameras to documentary filmmakers and news crews throughout the mid-20th century. Their equipment appeared on the front lines of World War II, in the hands of NASA engineers during the space program, and on film sets across Hollywood for decades. The 414P and the 624XL were serious tools used by serious professionals. That history is real, and it matters because it is precisely what makes the current licensing situation so jarring. The Bell & Howell name today appears on disposable cameras, low-cost camcorders, and novelty film cameras sold primarily through catalog retailers and novelty gift channels. The products are manufactured by third parties with no engineering continuity to the original company. There is a version of Bell & Howell cameras sold on Amazon with reviews that describe them charitably as functional, which is about as much as can honestly be said. Buying one based on what the brand name once represented is not a research-based decision. It is nostalgia purchasing, and the product does not reward it. Number 5. Argus. The Argus C3 was one of the most successful cameras ever sold in the American market. Introduced in 1939 at a price accessible to middle-class consumers, it was nicknamed the Brick, not as an insult, but as a description of its dense, rectangular bakelite construction. The C3 stayed in continuous production until 1966, a run of 27 years, because it was mechanically honest and optically competent enough to produce results that genuinely satisfied amateur photographers for nearly 3 decades. Over 2 million units were sold. The engineering was not flashy, but it was reliable, and reliability across that volume of production is its own kind of achievement. The Argus name has since been acquired and applied to a line of digital cameras, binoculars, and electronics that share nothing with that legacy except the badge. The products are targeted at the gift market and the budget end of the action camera shelf, priced for impulse purchase and designed accordingly. The engineering that made the C3 iconic was specific, deliberate, and genuinely difficult to achieve at that price in that era. The current products are none of those things. Number 6. Minolta. This entry deserves some genuine respect before it gets complicated. Minolta built world-class camera systems across 5 decades of continuous innovation. The SRT-101 from 1966 was a benchmark SLR for serious amateurs. The X700, introduced in 1981, became one of the most celebrated manual focus film cameras ever produced and remains a favorite on the second-hand market today. Then, in 1985, Minolta changed autofocus history with the Maxxum 7000, the first commercially successful integrated autofocus SLR system, building the AF motor into the camera body rather than the lens, a decision that set the template for every autofocus system that followed. When Konica Minolta exited the camera business in 2006, Sony acquired the camera division, the lens patents, and the optical engineering talent. Every Sony Alpha body made since carries Minolta's DNA in its mount geometry and autofocus architecture. That is the real Minolta legacy. What remains of the name in the consumer market, budget film cameras, disposables, novelty point and shoots sold through discount channels, has no relationship to that engineering history. Sony kept the substance. The brand name drifted into the remainder bin. Number 7. Concord Camera. Concord operated for decades as one of the most prolific manufacturers of disposable and budget fixed focus cameras in the world, while almost nobody who bought those cameras knew the Concord name. That is because Concord manufactured under licensed brand names. Polaroid, Argus, Vivitar, and others all moved product through Concord's factories at various points during the 1990s and early 2000s. The cameras were functional in the absolute minimum sense. They exposed film, they had shutters, they occasionally produced acceptable images under bright daylight conditions. Engineering differentiation was not the business model. Volume, shelf presence, and brand licensing were the business model. Concord filed for bankruptcy in 2009 as digital point-and-shoots compressed the disposable camera market from one direction and smartphones compressed it from the other. The disposable film camera has since experienced a genuine cultural revival, particularly among younger shooters drawn to the tactile and aesthetic qualities of film. There are good arguments for shooting cheap film cameras. Concord's products, wherever they still appear, are not the strongest version of that argument. Number 8. GE, General Electric, manufactures jet turbine engines capable of powering wide-body commercial aircraft. They produce MRI machines used in hospitals across the world. Their industrial infrastructure division generates electricity for entire cities. They do not make cameras. What GE does do is license the General Electric brand name to consumer electronics manufacturers who attach it to budget digital cameras because the two letters carry an implicit engineering credibility that the products themselves have not earned through any internal development process. The cameras perform at the level of any comparable budget digital camera from any comparable manufacturer, which is to say, adequately, for casual use, in reasonable lighting conditions. But the GE name on the box suggests a level of engineering investment and quality control that simply is not present. You can find the identical or near-identical imaging hardware under a different badge for less money. The brand premium here is purchased with no product premium attached to it whatsoever. Number 9. Sakar International. Sakar is the structural answer to a question most consumers never think to ask. Who actually makes all of these rebadged budget cameras? Sakar International, operating out of Edison, New Jersey, is the licensing and distribution operation behind more familiar-sounding camera brand names than most people will ever realize. Vivitar's current product line runs through Sakar. So does a rotating roster of other recognizable names that appear on end caps and gift catalogs and the camera sections of department stores. Sakar does not particularly obscure this. It is not a conspiracy. It is a business model built on the straightforward logic that a known brand name sells more units than an unknown one, regardless of whether the engineering inside has any relationship to the history behind the name. The cameras are variations on a small internal set of components dressed in different housings, badged with different logos, and sold at slightly different price points. Once the name is on the radar, the cameras start appearing everywhere under identities that previously seemed unrelated. Number 10. Lomography Society International. This is the entry that earns a genuine asterisk. Lomography is not a fraud. The cameras, the LCA, the Diana F+, the Sprocket Rocket, the Constructor, are real cameras that shoot real film and produce results with a distinct lo-fi character that a significant and genuinely enthusiastic community of photographers actively seeks out. The cross-processed colors, the vignetting, the light leaks. These are features to the lomography audience, not defects, and that is a legitimate photographic aesthetic with its own history and visual tradition. The problem is the pricing. A plastic camera with a plastic meniscus lens, manufactured in China, decorated with a retro-inspired colorway and sold through a boutique online store, consistently costs as much as or more than a used Olympus OM1, a used Pentax K1000, or a used Nikon FM2. Cameras built with metal bodies, precision glass, and mechanical engineering that will outlast any lomography product by decades and outperform them technically in every measurable category. Lomography sells a lifestyle, a community, and an aesthetic, and they price all three into every product. The cameras are not bad. The value equation requires a suspension of comparison that not every buyer is aware they are performing.